of flax and linen actually parallel human civilization, so it's very interesting. The uses, the flax uses, cultivation, how we grow it, how we sow it, how we harvest it, and a little bit on the flax fiber processing. There's actually two branches of this for the most part. It's we still grow flax in Canada, but most of it, or I would say 99.9% of it is for seed and for the seed side of it. What we're going to focus our time on today is the fiber side and how it relates to the textile industry. All right. So that is that picture there. There's going to be some pictures as we kind of go along too. With each slide, and then at the end we've got some pictures that we'll spend some time kind of going through, and then got some items here that as we go we'll talk a little bit about them. And I might at some point, John, get you to help me out with maybe the hackles there and bring them up in the discussion there. So what is flax? Two types: fiber flax, cultivated to produce a longer stem and is harvested for the fiber in the stem. And then there's oil. So this is actually fiber flax here. So it grows, 3 feet to 4 feet tall, and its energy, I guess you would say, is put into the production of the fiber as opposed to many seeds. The oilseed flax does not grow as tall, but produces more seeds. Seeds are roughly 60% oil, we know them as linseed oil. So the oil is pressed out of the seeds, and that's really the flax that's grown in Canada is for the seed. I got some seeds up here you can take a look at, but they're just little brown seeds, and they're quite heavy actually. The uses, there's so many uses. I won't get into the uses, all of the uses, no way. We'll just touch on a few as we kind of go through here. And then, like I say, at any time you can ask a question. That might be the only way to get me to stop talking is if you ask some questions. It might be the only way we'll get out of here for supper. What is linen? So linen is the flax fiber from the stem of the flax plant spun into thread or yarn. So I guess, they delineate the difference between flax and linen once it's spun. So there's, when we'll talk a little bit about processing, but buried in these stems are a ring of, and I actually don't have a picture of it, but if you can picture a straw, a hollow straw, and there's little bunches of fibers all the way around that straw, and that's what we have here. And so once that is spun into a thread, it's known as linen. So that's some linen there. When it's still in what they call the strict form or the fiber form, it is still considered flax, I guess. So, there's two types of flax fiber, and it's really in the processing of it. This is what we would call line linen. Now that's about 16 to 18 inches in length. It's just doubled up. So historically they would wrap them into quarter-pound bundles to keep the fibers from tangling. What's combed out is I think we got a picture of the processing here coming up, but is known as tow fiber, TOW, and it's shorter fibers. If you pulled on that, you'll see that they could be 7 inches, could be 8 inches, but down to even 2 and 3 inches long, and it's still usable. It's just used for coarser fabrics and tow ropes. Interestingly enough, I guess I don't want to get ahead of the slides here, but I guess when when you go through history and you think about fabrics, generally speaking, the northern hemisphere is more suited for growing flax. As you go further south, that's when you get into cottons being more predominant. Now there's other fibers as well, but I would say the two big ones were historically linen and cotton in terms of that type of fiber. Of course, wool was always a staple as well. So that's why, our area, we would know, if you go back far enough, we would know more, we would have more in the history of flax and flax fibers, just due to the nature of the weather and our weather patterns. We don't have enough heat units per year to really grow the cotton. Flax was first cultivated thousands of years ago. It parallels human civilization. During Bible times, there was two fibers, linen and wool, and that's what, old texts, that's what they speak of, is linen and wool, and the blending of them, and in some cases, laws against not blending of them, When Europeans first landed in North America, they were encouraged to plant a 1/4 acre of flax for each person in the household. Now that's, give or take some square footage, but that was actually true right down into, the northern part of the states, Pennsylvania and other places where, in order to sustain a household, there were certain things you needed, and one of the things was you needed cloth, you needed clothes, and you needed, table linens, toweling, that sort of thing, and we just didn't go down to the store and buy some. If you needed it, you grew it and you processed it. So that picture there, maybe go back a slide there, Caleb. One more. Yeah. This picture here, while we're still on this, is actually a picture of my backyard. Now, the camera's up close, so I don't have 10 acres of flax growing, but about 500 or 1,000 square feet. So, say from here to the wall square, or even less than that, is all you can really do, and manually do it in your spare time. It takes a bit of work. So it's a comfortable amount. Skip ahead to the next one. Okay, move ahead again here. Yeah, so the picture there is after it's been harvested and it's drying right there. The seeds are still on the end of the stems. Okay, move ahead. Some of the uses of flaxseed. Seeds are crushed for oil. Linseed oil is used for wood finishing, so you've probably seen in the hardware store boiled linseed oil. Well, I don't believe it's actually boiled. All it means is there's drying agents added to the oil to cause it to dry. In other words, otherwise it would take a long time to dry if you're finishing a piece of furniture or tabletop. And everybody knows nowadays we don't have time to wait. We gotta move on. So there's drying agents added to it. An additive for glazing putty, glazing around, window sashes, which we don't do a lot of now, but when you do, you can still buy it at Ken's glazing putty. Sometimes the linseed oil's been, changed for other types of oils, but historically it was linseed oil. Also plumber's putty. Anybody ever use plumber's putty? It's kind of some talc and some oil mixed together. It's used for around drains and stuff, and the oil in that would have historically been linseed oil. And flooring, everybody remembers oilcloth flooring, complaining about it rolling up on the ends of the sides of the kitchen. And we never had oilcloth, but I remember all the stories. And actually, I think linoleum is actually a brand. It was a brand of flooring invented or developed like in the mid-1800s, and it's actually two Latin words together linum, meaning flax, and oleum, meaning oil. And it took off, and then I think there was probably some knockoff brands, oil, they just called it oilcloth. But the true linoleum was a particular brand. Fiber flax, so talking about the actual fiber, so clothing, and modern uses is fiber in molded product, you know, automobile dashes and flooring, house furnishings. It's always been, you know, a staple in house furnishings as wool has been. Towels and bed linens. Now, you know, when you think about the difference between wool and linen, there is some overlap there, but you certainly don't want to, you know, use wool to try to dry your hands, because it's not, you know, it's not absorbent. It's not gonna dry. But there are certain, and the same for bed linens. Certain pieces of clothing could be either linen or wool. Generally speaking, you know, the wool was on the outer garment, and the linen was the inner garment. When you go back in time, you think about, just think about ship being built, you know, in the big ports, and you know, in Britain in the 1700s. I mean, you know, how many sails did they have, them big square riggers? And I think, you know, one of the statistics I heard, any of these statistics I give, feel free to check them, and if I'm wrong, get a hold of Richard. Richard will call me and say, hey, you're wrong, right? So, because I'm always willing to learn. Or if you happen to know the answer, if you're Googling it right now and you know the answer, just hey, I just Googled it, Troy, you're wrong, and tell me what, you know. But don't believe everything you see or you read on the internet either. Growing up, we didn't have the internet. I mean, and neither did a lot of you folks. But we always had that person in the community that kind of knew everything. You know? We had Uncle Don Long. Some of you may know Don. And he just, I know as a kid, like, he just seemed to have the answers. And looking back, I guess, you know, there was a time when I was asking him questions. I think I'd have to do the math, but he was probably younger than I am right now. And if I was born, you know, 50 years earlier, I could be the internet, you know, the community internet. So back to the ship. So you can imagine now, one of these big ships, having to get them sails. I think there's like 30 sails, 30 usable sails, or sails in use on some of them big square riggers. Probably some had less, some had more. And if you can imagine, you're on a voyage loaded, and you know you need spares, and so you would have upwards to 20 spare sails. So you would have a payload of 50 sails. Now these sails would, I mean, each sail, it's hard to imagine the size of these ships, but I mean they would take up this room if you rolled them out, right? And I think the spec I heard was it took 200 acres of flax to grow to make the linen for a square rig ship, and that's just been shipped. And the ships come out of, you know, especially when, you know, Britain was building its fleet. You can just imagine the spinning and the weaving and the growing, and just mind-boggling, really. Flax cultivation. So it's actually not a grain. It's not a grain. It's technically speaking. Now, if my brother-in-law was here, he's actually a doctor in botany. So I hope he doesn't see this. Hope he doesn't see this film. But he would say that it's really considered, technically it's a berry, but you plant it by broadcasting it or grain, or drilling it in like you would wheat or oats. About half an inch, approximately 75 seeds per square foot. I think it's around 110 pounds per acre. I've never planted that much, but I do backwards math, and I think for like 1,000 square feet, I put on a couple pounds or something like that. Now the mathematicians here will be doing the math already. They'll be saying, well, there's 42.5 thousand square feet in an acre, and I'm already lost. Yeah, they're right there, 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet. I think it's actually less than that, but you always put on extra. It's like pepper on your potatoes. Harvesting. So flax stems are actually grubbed from the ground, and they're pulled, not cut, and then allowed to dry. So if you've seen, grain stubble, there's always 2 to 3 inches of stubble sticking up, unless you've got a rocky field, in which case, they'll raise the head up a little bit higher so they don't hit any rocks. And in the case of the fiber going right to the root, you could lose 4 inches of fiber. So it's actually pulled. There's actually 2 reasons why it's pulled. The main reason is when you're drying it, and then the next step is retting it, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. You don't want any open wounds on the stem. You want it all closed up still. You want it to dry and ret. Ret is a German word for rot. And what you're doing is rotting the bark off of the outer stem so that you free up the fibers. You eventually would rot the fibers as well, but they take longer to rot. So if you can get just that perfect time when the bark's rotted, but the fiber's not, that's when you get the best, what they call line linen, which is the long line linen fibers. So I guess quality-wise, you get the best quality when your planting depth is consistent, your soil properties are consistent, your harvesting times are consistent. Consistency is the key word to allow you to get the best and the most fiber from your crop. Now, the only place this is grown at any great scale right now is Europe, like Normandy, northern France, and Belgium, and some in China. But for the most part, that's it, and on an industrial scale. I think there's, let's say, 200,000 acres total in Europe, and they grow it for fiber, and it goes to the big linen mills, and so if you buy, I would call them expensive. If you buy high-priced bed linens, true linen, more than likely it comes from one of them 2, cultivation areas. And consistency, when you look at them fields, every plant, you could run a laser almost on the top of them plants, and they're pretty even. You don't get like my crop where I got a short fella and then a tall one, and I think they rotate every 6 or 7 years, so they only grow flax on a field once every 6 or 7 years. Flax will take a lot of certain types of nutrients out of the soil, so you have to we got a question, yes?
Growing season, how long?
Yeah, so the growing season for fiber is, the early settlers would use 90 or 100 days. And the reason why they would use that is because they not only wanted the fiber, but they had to reclaim seed as well. There's a balance. If you want to get the most seed, then you would let it go. You would let it ripen. You let it whiten, and your seeds fully develop, and they'll actually rattle. In fact, you let them seeds ripen, and you wave your hand over it. It's just like many tiny little baby rattles. You can hear them rattling in the wind. Then it's ready for seed harvest. But the problem with that is your fiber has already reached its best quality, and it's starting to go the other way. So it's starting to get coarser, bigger. Now you can still use it for ropes and that sort of thing, but it's lost its fineness for toweling and fine linens. If you were after fine linens, you would harvest it before the seeds fully develop, and you would lose your ability to. But so the early settlers, they would have tried to cut it down the middle and get the most seeds they could, but the best fiber they could, and kind of balance it out that way. So great question, thanks. And it's pretty much right on 90 days. I mean, you know, at 60 days it starts to flower, and at 90 days your seeds are starting to rattle, and it doesn't seem that rain, less rain, more sun, it just seems to be timed just perfect. And you could leave it there longer, but it doesn't grow any taller and doesn't get any better. It's time to harvest it. Flax stems are grubbed, yeah. So, you know, I'd like to have a video, but I wasn't able to bring it, but a video of the flax grubbers in Europe. And I mean, these things move along at about 20 kilometers an hour and are grubbing, you know, 8 foot wide swaths of this, you know, because when it ripens, you gotta grub it, and so they don't waste time. And seed harvesting, seeds are rippled, removed from the stalk, and then threshed out like grain. Yeah. Although flax is not a grain. So yeah, I got some up here you can look at after, but it just looks like it would, if you had oats threshed out, you were threshing out oats, you'd have your seeds and you'd have threshings, and you could winnow it out in the wind, use a seed cleaner, so it would really look the same. What you have going for you with the flax is its specific gravity is quite high, so it will tend to fall down to the bottom. You get a real difference between the chaff being really light and the seeds being really heavy. So any seed cleaner will work. I got an old seed cleaner at home, and I just poured it in. I didn't even turn the crank, and clean flax seeds were coming to the bottom, and the chaff was kind of blown in the wind, and so it's really lends itself to that. Fiber harvesting, so moving along here, fiber harvesting, stems must be redded, meaning the outside bark is allowed to rot. That can either be dew redded or water redded. So that is redded flax. So really what happens is when you pull it, and you kind of would bend it like you would a stem of timothy or a stalk of oats, oat straw. It's still green, so it's bendable, it's pliable. You can see the fibers, but you really can't get at them because everything is sort of still glued together. You have to lay it out. In Europe, modern day, how they do it is they lay it out in big long windrows and try to, along with consistency being important, it's important not to tangle your stems up. Starting from the time that you pull them from the ground, they got to stay uniform, because everything you do from then on, any tangles, is just going to decrease the ability to extract the fiber. So laid out in very neat rows. And depending on the weather, I think Northern Europe has optimal conditions for redding. You want a little bit of dew at night, and you want drying sun in the day. If you get it too dry all the time, you don't get the water at night, so you don't have the microorganisms working to kind of break down them stems. So Europe is very well suited. Certain places in Canada are very well suited. Ireland, not so much. I mean, when you think of Irish linen, historically, I think they water red it, and so we'll redding, do wet red it or water redding. So, so if you look at the strix here, the darker ones, the silver-colored ones, would be dew-redded. They've got like a silvery color. The lighter ones on the other side would be water-redded. And water redding is just putting in a big water tank for 3 or 4 days, and you put the stems in the big water tank 3 or 4 days, and they'll go from green to like a blonde color. And you got to keep testing, because in 3 or 4 days you could go from just rotting the bark off to rotting the fiber. So they used to do it in rivers, lakes. Sometimes they would make artificial ponds and do it, but it does leave an awful stench. It's like a rotting smell. And a lot of the towns where they used to do it, people would complain of the stench. Kind of like living in an industrial town where you complain about the smokestacks, but yet you get in your vehicle and go to work the next day to the same spot. So it's hard to complain. So but yeah, it had that stench to it. And you don't get that with dew redding, but you get the silvery color as well. So if you want lighter colored, then you would water red. On a small scale, it's not really, doesn't hurt the environment, but on a large scale, you can imagine, so they have to have water treatment plants and that sort of thing. Fiber processing stems are broken on a flax break. This can take several forms. So everything from a rock and a stump to breaking them with your hands to what you would see if you went to any of the museums that are still have a flax display as a flax break. And there's 3 boards on the bottom and 2 on the top, and the handle just hinges. I'll just kind of show you how it works.
Set that up. A lot of them would have their own stand. I think John was speaking to that earlier. And you would just draw your stems through and just keep breaking them, and then they would just become limp, like they'd go from that to this with a whole bunch of chaff in it. So you would grab some of them stems and you would lay them on that break and just keep breaking, and then turn it around, lay them on and break, and then you would have a bunch of chaff, and that's at that point they would
use what they call a scutching knife, and this is one that I made. I actually don't use it much because I skipped that step. I guess scutching, it does add to the fiber. It shines it. But it's hard work. So, as if the rest of it isn't. That's even harder. Now, John has an original scutching knife here. Just want to maybe pick that up. And don't make him mad. Well, he's got that knife. Yeah, so this is the museums, and that's an original scutching knife, and it's not warped. It's actually made for a right-handed person. And you can kind of see how it's kind of flat on that side. And the reason is they would use a scutching board. So
scutching board, they would lay the fiber over top of the scutching board. So there'd be a long board down to the ground. They'd lay that over in a little V notch at the top, and you would basically beat that fiber and push out the chive or the chaff, and that helps break up the little fiber bundles, and it adds a kind of a shine to it as well. And so it's a step that it's important. Mechanized plants would have big scutching wheels that would just picture like a bedroom fan or something, and you would lay that in against the fan, and you would kind of beat that fiber and then pull away all of the dust and chaff.
Once that process is done, then it's what we would call, we would do what we call hackle it. So there's an interesting sort of history behind the word hackle. It's actually synonymous with heckle. And, years ago, I forget the town in Scotland where it originated, but you can imagine making linen for ships, other things, that you would have a crew of people hitting this linen and flax and then combing out the fibers. And so what John has here is a comb called a hackle, and it looks like a medieval torture device. And you would draw the fibers over the hackle to up just halfway on the strick, and then you would turn around and do the other side, holding it tight so that you don't pull fibers out and lose fibers. And you will lose fibers. These fibers will turn out to be the tow fibers that'll stay on stay on the Hackle, and you pull them and leave them aside. Then there would be medium and fine, and you might go to the fine one for some things, but you wouldn't have to. If you're making, coarse, grain sacks, then you wouldn't need to go that fine. Depends on how fine you're spinning. The town in Scotland, so they would have, before the mechanized factory, they would have a group of people, and they would be hired, and they would be hackling flax. Somebody would come in and read the newspaper, and I don't know how many work in a place where there's a lunchroom. You got a bunch of people, and I know the women might say, "Oh, that happened where the men work," but I can tell you, my wife's a nurse, and the nurses are worse than the men. So somebody would read the newspaper, and the rest of them would just make comments. "Oh, that's stupid. Never heard tell of that. They don't know what they're doing. Oh, that's awesome," or "That's great," And so you would call, since they were hecklers, we now know them as hecklers. And I'm glad to say there's no hecklers here, although when I seen some of the characters come in, I was thinking that, I don't know why I automatically looked at John Musgrove when I thought about that, So anyway, whether that story is completely true, partially true, no doubt it's partially true, as most stories like that are. There's a flax break there. I guess we're into the pictures now, aren't we? Yeah, okay. So there's a flax break. That's actually at Ross Farm in Nova Scotia. Maybe right now I just want to clarify a couple things. The announcement said that I was the only person growing linen in Kings County and making things. It's actually, I know of another person that actually contacted them last night and asked their permission to talk about them. And it's Emily McCumber. She's, I think where she grows her flax is actually on the Kingston Peninsula. She lives in St. John, and she is I don't even know anything about her compared to her. Like, she's a master weaver. She's won awards. She weaves all kinds of fiber, and part of what she does is she does experiment with flax and linen. But her online business is Spinner Weaver, and so if you get a chance, take a look at her products. She runs a store in St. John. Good Vibrations is the name of it. So some of you may have been there. Some of you may know her. But anyway, she does awesome work. It's like if, I play guitar, but if like Ricky Skaggs come in and said, "I heard you play guitar," I'd say, "No, I don't know where you got that information." So it's kind of like that. Like if she was here, like I'd say, I just pack my stuff up and go. So if you like making messes, this is the business to get into. So that's the garage floor, and so there's fiber, there's chaff, and I'm still standing in front of you folks, I'm so sorry. Now I'm in front of I'm always in the way. Bark and seeds, and after cleaning up and you sweep it out, my driveway's paved now because my brother got tired of coming down and parking his nice clean truck on a dirt driveway. So he said, "I'm coming down to pave your driveway one day." And I said, "Boy, that's great." I did have to pay, although he probably cut me a deal, no doubt. So I guess where I was going is I don't sweep my garage in my driveway anymore. However, interesting, some of the wind caught this, and I never thought any more of it, and I cleaned the garage up. And the good thing about this is it's all biodegradable, so I just put it in the compost pile, the remains of all this, and I come home from work one day and there was flax plants growing right where the crack of the concrete and the asphalt meet. Now, I don't know if you guys are like me, but I have trouble growing grass on my lawn, but yet it seems to grow. You know, did you ever try to grow a tree on your lawn and you call the experts and you put, you know, the plant food on it and you keep deer away from it. And then you'll take a walk through the woods and you'll see this tree growing and the roots are like wrapped around a big boulder. And I don't know why that sort of thing happens, but maybe it just happened to me. Process flax fiber, yeah. So that's some of the stuff we have here, and that's some thread. This one's fun. It's technically called yarn. I did an experiment last winter where I bleached with chlorine bleach, which I'm never ever going to do again. It does weaken the fiber. There's other ways of bleaching. There's other things you can use to bleach, but so the white towels were bleached. Actually, once they were into California, they were fine. But normally when you're weaving, you know, on a towel you might have 600 and some threads across the loom, and it might have 4 break of the silver threads. Dew-retted, natural colored linen. You might have 4 or 5 break. They were upwards to 100 and then broke. So it was a test of your patience. Nobody was getting hurt, so we just kept at it. Something I would, full disclosure, one of these is a linen towel from Paris. My wife picked up a couple years ago when she was there on a trip. I just kind of want to put it here as just to compare. This is actually cotton, so if you want to, after we're done, you can come up around and take a look, and that's actually cotton. And I just got it here just to kind of show the difference in them. But the rest are some of the samples of stuff I say we, my wife doesn't have much to do with it. She does weave, but she uses cotton. So that's one of the towels there to make the one I gave Mom, I think, one year. And some of the first ones I didn't even bother putting any accents or anything in it. That's just natural. You can actually see there's a brown stripe in there. That flax was actually grew in Norton, different ground, and so ground, weather, sun, rain, all has an effect on the color you get, right? And this is dyed blue cloth. Anyway, yeah, some of the towels. Somebody wanted to buy one, and I said I can't afford to sell it. I said, you do the math, it would probably be $1,500 a towel. That's at minimum wage. Yeah. That it? Okay. Some of the stuff we have up here is some of it's for weaving, just to kind of show. Anybody ever tell of a linen tester? So that's a linen tester there. It's just a little spyglass they used to lay on the linen, and they would count picks or count threads per inch. We got a question right back here.
Yes, we were talking about money a few minutes ago. I understand that people were taxed on the amount of linen that they kept in their farmhouses. Was that because they were supposed to sell all the linen that they produced to the government to make sales and things like that? I'm thinking about 1830. But do you know anything about how flax really fit into the economy of the community?
Yeah, I have heard that, and I guess high-level answers I don't know, but I'm assuming a couple things. The value of that linen, just as we talked about how much work goes into it, would probably outvalue, the wood used to make your home and your furniture. Back in Ireland, they actually hired people to be linen watchers when they were bleaching linen on the bleaching greens. They would when it come off the loom, they would roll it out, and they would actually hire security to watch that linen. It was of such value. So I'm assuming that it's part of the value of it. Now they tax our home, you know, where homes are taxed, you know, that's one of the most valuable things we have. And, you know, making a couple of assumptions there. Might be something we could look into. Where's my researcher? Oh, he's behind the camera right there. Yes?
Using fax for sales, 150 years ago, was a big business of building ships, sailing ships around the Bay of Fundy. Did they grow the fax for that locally, or is it imported? We have an awful lot of fax.
Yeah, more than likely imported, more than likely. I think, not to beat up on Britain, but Britain had an economy they needed to protect. And so I think, you know, don't want to get into the history of North America, but I think, you know, one of the sticking points with, you know, the colonies in the States was, you know, a lot of their products they had to buy from Britain. And so I would assume most of it was imported on that scale. And that was probably when the shift started, where we grew less on our allotments here. That was when we were, you know, I would say sustenance farmers as opposed to more industrial farmers. And not sure when that change happened, but it certainly happened before a lot of the places that we know were settled. You know, like I don't imagine linen was grown on Snyder Mountain, as an example. You know, I grew up there, but because I would imagine the shift predated the further expansion of the colonies. So probably the late 1700s is when. Now I think kind of into that, the Acadians, interestingly, they held on to it longer than the you know, than the Scotch Irish. They held on to the tradition. One of the reasons I think they held on to the tradition of growing their own linen is sort of their way of just saying, their way of getting back at Britain, I guess, would be one way of putting it, right? So if you go to the, and that's actually one of the first times I've ever seen it. I was fascinated. We were at the Acadian Museum. You know, we went as kids, and then we went back a few years later, and that's one of the my first exposure to it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I believe.